It seems in prison that when you're winning a fight, CEOs are in there, they're in no time, and they just pop out of nowhere. But if you're losing a fight, it takes forever to get there. At least that's what it seems like.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
So this guy asked me, a young guy asked me the other day, he said, tell me about all the fights and stabbings and all this in prison, all the bad things you've seen. And so I told him, and come to find out he'd been in prison too, but he'd been in lower level prisons, and he said he saw some fights down there, and he told me about a few of them. The few months I was in a low level prison, I just saw fights. I never saw stabbings. I did see one assault. My introduction to all of this was when I got to the Missouri State Penitentiary, which was, when it was operational, was the worst prison in the state. I mean, I seen hot water mixed with oil thrown in people's faces. Somebody was telling somebody else about, they had seen the same thing. This was on another platform. This person commented below, said, man, everybody says that. It's not true. You're just telling somebody else's stories. Well, stabbings happen all the time too, and fist fights happen all the time. Does that mean that everybody but one person is lying? No. I mean, I've seen a person, back then they had the metal mop wringers, you know, that you pulled the handle, squeezed. I seen a guy take one of those from the Walkman and hit another guy upside the head. Did a number on him. I mean, like, laid the skin back. Like, they had these tables on the upper yard. I think there was some on the lower yard too, but there's people that used to gamble up there, and seen a guy get stabbed by, the thing was almost like a sword. It wasn't a knife, it was a sword. Came right behind him. That's why I always say, man, try to stay aware of your surroundings. And I think that's a good idea to do out here too, especially the way things are nowadays. But there's this one story that was told about this guy who took a stinger, the immersion heater, tied up his celly, stuck it in him where the sun don't shine, and plugged it in. And these, back then, was the 500 watt ones, and it got red real quick and blew up, and he ended up, you know, with a capital crime, and can't talk. Ended up, you know, when they moved it to Potosi, being sent there. I told him, I said, man, of all the things that happened there, I cannot tell you every single one of them, because there was something happening every day, sometimes 2 or 3 things at once. It was bad. He goes, man, I just saw a few fist fights, you know, when I was in prison, and I wasn't there very long. But it's like, I think I told you guys before, I was talking to my friend Kevin, who was in South Central Correctional Center, and he told me, he said it's getting so bad there that it's almost like the walls. MSP, that's what he's talking about. I find that very hard to believe. Of course, when I first got to prison, the old heads was telling me, man, you think it's bad now? 10 years ago, it was even worse. He said, but they started charging people for stabbing people. He said, before they didn't. You just did a few months in the hole. So he said everybody was getting stabbed, you know, all the time. It seemed like that's what was going on then, you know, so I can't imagine being any worse. But he said that South Central Correctional Center in Licking, Missouri is just almost as bad, in his opinion. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, the only difference is, he goes, usually, he said, you know, at the walls, he goes, it was chaotic and everything. He said, but there was an order to the chaos. He said, there ain't no order to this. He said, man, just people just stabbing one another for no reason. None. He goes, you could just be minding your own business and get it. I said, man. I told him, I said, it kind of seemed like that sometimes to me behind the walls, you know, when we was inside. He said, yeah, but he said it's different. He said it's just as bad. And he said it's all because lack of staff, and there's all this corruption going on with the staff and everything. He goes, you know, the warden got fired and a bunch of COs and stuff because of all that. He said, but it didn't stop anything. It's still going on. They just a little bit more careful. He goes, they was having freeways. She was letting the COs bring stuff in. That's why she got fired. And I said, man. He said, man, it's bad here. And he goes, and that big F, he said the actual name. I'm not going to say it here on YouTube because YouTube doesn't like saying things like that. I had to take down one video because of that. But he said, it's causing people to drop like flies. And then he said, they're notifying their people and telling them natural causes on most of them. He goes, I saw that on KOLR 10, you know, the local news that was talking about it. I said, man, you know, he said, all of us like, what? Natural causes? So you have 7 deaths in 1 week and it's natural causes. But at the walls, you had these 4 tiers, we called them walks. You had these 4 tiers. The bottom one, though, was called the flag. I seen people jump off the top. Some of them not on purpose. But one time when I was on 8th walk, I believe it was the 8th walk. Yeah, 8th walk. And walking down it, and all of a sudden we're going to chow, and all of a sudden the line just stops. You know, I'm thinking, what's going on? And it slowly got moving again, and finally we stepped over this person. You know, he was laying there. When I stepped over him, he was still alive. You know, but you're just going about your business. If it doesn't concern you, you're just going about your business. And then there's Robert Burdella. I did a video on him. I was so mad at the old heads because I figured they'd be one to take this guy out. If you don't know who Robert Burdella is, look that video up of mine or just look him up. Kansas City Butcher. And they kept saying, hey, chill, young blood, chill. Just wait. Because I told them, I said, you guys don't do something, I'm going to. They said, man, just chill. And then one day, it was in the evening time, he started complaining of chest pains. And they took their time getting up there, and then when I got up there, I stuck my little mirror out and I was watching, because there's bars in the front. And they just stood there. Some of them leaned back against the rail. They just stood there. About 30 minutes. Then one of them gets a radio and calls for medical. Medical comes down there and stands there and looks at him a little bit. Goes in. And then they take him out. So if you read about that, and it always says online and stuff, because I've looked it up, that he passed away because of a heart attack. Well, that may be true, but they didn't really give him the help when he needed it. I remember the next day at breakfast coming out, and one of the old heads that had been talking to me, you know, about this, he said, see, what I tell you, young blood, just chill. He goes, man, you get too rash, man. You got to think things out sometimes. The walls is closed now, but it was the worst. I mean, there was violence in other prisons, you know, and things kicking off all the time, but not like at the walls. But apparently now, South Central Correctional Center, and I heard Bonne Terre is another one that is having, or was it Charleston? Might have been both of them, but either way, they got a lot of problems too. When I was still in prison, there was people that had come from Charleston, and they'd tell me, man, said if you're a white guy and you go to Charleston, you better be ready to fight, because whites are outnumbered down there, and they're always trying to start stuff with them. I seen kind of the opposite at Licking, but when it first opened, because when we first got there, it had already been open, but they changed it to a 5. They had to. But when we got there, it was mostly white, because there's people that lived in that area. kind of out in the country. The town's name's Licking. Sorry. About 25 miles from where I grew up. Anyway, but it was with the staff. The staff had a problem with them. And a lot of times they would, like, if I did something that was against the rules that maybe usually just give you a warning, a black person can do the same thing, and the same CO that gave me a warning will give him a violation. That's just the way it was, you know. And I'm sure down there in Charleston, it's the other way around. If there's any black COs down there, they're going to be giving the white dudes a violation. I mean, that's just the way it is. It sucks, but, you know, it's prison. And people say all the time, well, COs are supposed to act professionally. Yeah, they are. And I'm not sticking up for them. There are some, I don't want to use the names that I have for these COs that are bad. And some of them are brutal, man. They'll beat you and stuff, you know. And some of them will just harass you. There's no doubt there are some bad ones. And I would say even the ones who are not involved in all that, but don't say anything because they're afraid of losing their job, they're just as guilty. Even if they may be a cool CO or whatever, they're just as guilty if they're not saying anything. That's my opinion. But I will say this, I know one time this guy spit on a CO. This was a pretty cool CO, so I don't know why he had a problem with it. There's some people that just hate anybody that has a badge, you know. I mean, just loathe them. But he spit on him, and that CO swung and struck him. He ended up losing his job. And people say, you know, he should be arrested for assaulting, whatever. Well, maybe he should. But I want to tell you something. If somebody spits on me, I'm probably going to do the same thing. I don't blame that CO for doing that. Well, what are you going to do if somebody spits on you? You just going to walk away? They said he should have walked away and issued a conduct violation. Yeah, that is probably the right procedure, you know. Put him in cuffs and take him to the hole, because that's an assault. It is. Spitting on them, you can even touch them and you can get an assault charge. I mean, not just hitting them, but just like lay your hand on them, and that's considered an assault. Anyway, that's some of the things we talked about, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.